Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the show.
Well, good morning, Mike. How you doing?
Doing great. I got a quick question for you, Tommy. I've been wanting to ask you this for a while. So I know you drink a lot of coffee, and you also do it with you have your special way that you produce your coffee with the little Italian
Yes.
2-cup coffee thing on the stove thing. Okay. Do you add anything to your coffee, or do you just drink it straight up? Are you a straight up drinker, or do you add like a little sugar? Do you add some milk and cream to it? Like, what do you do?
So I'm an almond cream guy, and not because of any health reasons. It's just the taste of it. So I never did care for cream, and I can't if I have
Like
to.
almond milk.
Almond milk. Almond, yeah. Well,
as a creamer.
Yeah. I used to be able to do it straight, just straight nothing.
Yeah.
But why? It's so much more enjoyable with a little almond milk. And the almond milk has a little like Italian flavor to me. So that's, I think, why I like it. But that's me. What about you?
You can get them with different flavors. So almond milk comes in like just plain, and you can get like vanilla, and you kind of give a little bit of extra something to it. I used to do, you know how they have those pumps like at Starbucks, like the pump. Yeah. There's like a brand of pump. You can get the one from Starbucks directly, or you can get the ones like there's like a Torino one as well that I.
Yes.
I used to use those, and then we were like, wow, look at all the ingredients on these things, and wow, so much high fructose corn syrup on them. That's not really real stuff. So we decided to go more towards maple syrup. You said you can switch it out with maple syrup. So now I apply a little dollop of maple syrup in the bottom of my cup. I admittedly, Tommy, I don't do coffee. I do like espresso. So it's like it's like I steam the milk and then I put it with some espresso shots. But then I now put a little dollop of maple syrup at the bottom, steam the milk with the maple syrup in it. It gets a little bit sweeter. And then I put my coffee
I've heard of
shots with that as well.
With the syrup. Good. I have heard of that with the syrup. And I think this is our friendly PSA to everyone out there to stop drinking American coffee. Go with how the rest of the world drinks it, because you're much more efficient that way. So I'm not a Starbucks guy at all. I can't do it anymore, because here's the thing. You go to Starbucks or your normal coffee shop. Like, hi, can I get a grande or large coffee? You get a coffee that's, as big as your head.
Yeah.
And you have to drink the whole thing. It comes with, 18,000 calories of sweetness and all that stuff if you do the cream. Oh, yeah. Or you do espresso, which is maybe 1/8 of that. And you have the same amount of caffeine in it. And I'm done. I'm done in less than 2 minutes.
Okay, now I see what you're saying. So you're saying the espresso shots are the more efficient way of getting your coffee.
It's much more efficient. I don't want to take
less calories.
Minutes. Yeah, to drink less calories, all of that. So it's just a more efficient way of doing things. I mean, people say they enjoy their coffee. Yeah, no, you enjoy your milkshake. You enjoy your milkshake that happens to have coffee flavor in it.
That's funny. That's true. Okay.
So, yeah.
Funny little intro there. I just wanted to ask your question. I was just thinking about that this morning and thought I'd ask you how you do your coffee. All right, let's jump into our main topic today. Or actually not. We have some news, but I'm going to give you the main topic today. Today we have a mailbag question, a question from our listeners, and we're going to go kind of a little bit deeper into a calculation group. How do you use it? What's it look like in practice? What patterns do you see using calculation groups? Are there any row level security limitations on top of the calculation groups? And any kind of like workarounds, tips, or tricks that you use when you build with calculation groups? So that being said, that is our topic for today. We're going to dive into a little bit more DAX related things. But before we get into our main topic, let's talk a little bit about news. Tommy, you found an article here that is quite interesting. It's be in the description below here as well. Let's unpack this new article post here around OneLake.
We'll do the best we can, Mike. So this came out last week on the Fabric blog, and the title, OneLake Cost Simplified, Lowering Capacity Utilization when Accessing OneLake. The idea here is it's a rate change and a way to really understand your capacity, the cost for transactions via the proxy in your Fabric capacity. And what they're trying to sell, or what they're trying to say, I should say, is they're optimizing your capacity spend. Now, Mike, this is great. However, I don't want to say I have problems with this, but to the naked eye, there's not a lot here that you're going to be able to really understand. They have change. They show you what you're reading per 4 megabytes or 10,000 ops, the redirects, capacity unit rate, the previous rate, the new rate, and they have all these different seconds on here for your capacity units.
Yep.
Mike, the only way this is going to make sense for you if you're doing rigorous testing to me.
I also, one of the things in this article, so this is interesting. So happy that they're bringing costs to looks like a lower level.
Yeah.
The new rate looks consistent here. What I don't understand here is this proxy rate. I mean, I've read a lot of documentation. I've been doing Fabric for a while here. I understand maybe the direct consumption CU rate, but what does a proxy rate mean? They're using language here in the article that I don't quite understand. Like if I run a data flows Gen 2 on a different workspace that's not in the same workspace, is that a proxy? Is that going between Fabric tenant to Fabric tenant? Is that a proxy? I don't know what they mean by the proxy rate of the OneLake catalog. So that's what I don't understand. I need like a definition real quick here of like, can you please define for me what is, they call it redirect CU rate and proxy rate.
Proxy, it almost sounds like that's the one going from a different data center to another, but that also would sound like the reader. That would be my only guess, that you're having to move data centers. But the idea here is regardless.
That's a guess. Like we don't know.
Yes.
Do you know it?
We're dumb. No.
I don't know this. I'm like,
I don't. My MVP.
Like, so I guess my question is like, okay, thank you, Microsoft, for unifying the rates. But on the other hand, I look at it going, okay, do I have any proxy rates on my CUs? Like, where are they?
Proxy?
How would I find them? Is it in the usage metrics reporting or is it in the capacity reporting? Do I see it there? I've never seen that.
So I bet it's in that semantic model. I bet it's in the semantic model.
Where the heck does it come from? I don't know.
What can I do to not have a proxy? For my, but the idea here is now, regardless of which path you take, whether you know what path you're taking, it's going to be the same cost.
Correct. And it's quite substantial. So in the other, so to their credit, right, there's a quite substantial decrease on consumption for this proxy rate. So if you're doing a read operation, you're getting a third, basically roughly a third of the cost. If you're doing a write operation, you're getting about a little bit more than half of the cost, a little bit less than half the cost. If you're doing an iterative read, which seems like that's the really expensive one, that's getting like a fourth of the cost, maybe a little bit maybe more like half the cost. And then the same thing for other operations, whichever other operations are. I don't know what other operation you'd be doing other than read, write, or iterative read. Like you either read or writing. Think maybe deletes. I don't know. Again, it would be. This article seems a bit vague to me. So, thank you, Microsoft, for giving me a discount. I don't know if I'm getting it.
Most regions coming soon. So, like, should I tell my clients? Should I look at my own operations? Yeah, but this is all good. It's all good, but at the same time, you want to know everything you're dealing with, right? And if you know that there's a proxy redirect, I want to read on it, and I want to dive into it, and I want to know what I can do and how to optimize it. We talk about best practices in data integration, but we don't talk a lot about, well, there are things that Fabric works differently than your normal lakehouse, than a normal warehouse. The conversations we've had with Brad, we're dealing with a capacity units, which I imagine works different than Synapse. It has to. It has different features. So I think a lot of this is testing, and a lot of this too is wherever we can find the documentation.
So I've Googled this proxy rate thing because I've never heard of this before. I didn't know there was two different rates for things. So from the documentation that Microsoft provides, I'll just read you the little excerpt here and see if this makes any more brings clarity to what this thing proxy is standing for. OneLake supports two types of access paths, redirect and proxy. Fine, great. Applications will use one of these paths on specific circumstances. Some is determined by the workload, and others are outside of its control, the workload control, I would assume. Request via proxy and redirect share the same consumption rate, which is the update. The update is now, it doesn't matter which one you're using, it all is the same thing. It still doesn't tell me like when a redirect is happening. So it's almost like
Or
the
what
workload
workload?
itself could be using a redirect or a proxy location. It doesn't really tell me like the tables are the same. You have like these two
Right.
tables here that are describing like here's the proxy rates, here's the redirect rates. Again, when there was two different rates, it would make sense that there was different stuff. But I don't really see any other notes on this page as to where does redirect occur
Right.
and an example of a redirect flow. Like what does that mean?
I'm curious if they took out some of the workloads since the rates are the same now, because my first thought, Mike, is, well, if some of the workloads are always by default going to choose one or the other, then I want to use more of those workloads, especially if the cost is that substantial or the consumption's that substantial. But they're the same now. So
Well, yes, I agree with you. What I'm contemplating here is like, is this, and again, this is where I'm like, does data flows? So this is where I would want to see like by default, does
interesting.
one, like, so I just did the scenarios. It's like the scenarios. I don't understand the scenarios. Like, hey, if you're using a data flow and you're reading from a lake house and putting it in a lake house, that's when you would use the proxy. Or, there's, if you're using a network security protocol, that's when we use proxy. Like I don't know when it occurs. Like what are the conditions under which talking to the lake from the workload? And I'm assuming the workload we're saying, data flows, pipelines, notebooks, Custo things, right? Or something like that. So operations where you're actually doing data movement, that's where I would assume we would be seeing the proxy appear. The documentation is so weak, I don't understand what that means.
Are you doing that philosophical argument? Not all proxies are data flows, but all data flows are proxies.
Who knows? Could be. I don't know that. Again, I can't tell you what proxy means, and there's really no. Let me check the other page here. Okay, so it looks like it might be on the. So looking at another article here, one lake capacity consumption example, which would tell you the one lake compute. One lake write via proxy and one lake read via redirect could appear on your consumption page. So when you go into the details on an item on the main page, you'll be able to see, is it write via proxy or write via redirect? And it looks like there's, in this example here, there's they have a lake house that they have, and there's just a number of operations occurring in CU consumption on that item, and it will break out the consumption via proxy or redirect. I mean, nice. It's also nice to know that all of it's the same now, so the pricing is the same. But again, I never knew one workload versus another would actually do something like that. I have no clue.
Well, and now it doesn't matter.
Now it doesn't matter. So that was basically a meaningless conversation. Thank you. We had a whole conversation around something got better that I didn't even understand, and now the cost is the same, so I don't even need to understand it. So just ignore that whole conversation we just had. You can forget about what proxy means. It costs the same as a redirect, and now you don't even care.
Well, there's a moral to the story, Mike. We'll put a good spin on this. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't either, and you don't need to know it. So just ignore it and move on. Just keep buying more fabric.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, throw more CUs at it. All right. Well, let's get over that news item. Let's go into our main topic today. So main topic today, we actually do have a mailbag, and I will also include in the link description below here, we're going to talk about calculation groups, and there is some official documentation from Microsoft around calculation groups. I'll also try to include SQL BI has done an inordinate amount of documentation around calculation groups. So I'll try to include an article too from them about like what is a calculation group, how you might use it. That'll also probably form some of your opinion around where calculation groups would be useful. All right, Tommy, want to go ahead and read us our mailbag?
Of course. How often do you use calculation groups in your reporting, either native or through Tabular Editor? And what groups and in what ways do you most often use them? Finally, for any calculation groups you currently do, how often do you run into issues with RLS, row level security, limitation that calculation groups has? And are there certain workarounds you do to deliver your best work to the client? We'll pause there. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you want to start with this one, Tommy? How do you want to kind of start with this?
Well, I'm gonna just lay it on the line, Mike, that we don't talk about calculation groups a lot in our podcast. If I were to make a guesstimate, I would say over the last 454 or 52 episodes, we've probably talked about it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, I
And
don't think it's come up very much.
it's some, and a lot of them have been a mailbag too. And Mike, and I'll be honest with you, this is a feature that when it came out, I imagine it being a universal feature, or staple of my reports.
Yes.
I wanted to put this into every single report that I had. I thought it was awesome. I thought for just time intelligence alone, this feature would be just, again, a universal staple of what I did. It was going to be part of my process. What I found though, and in terms of the management of it, and also just the ease of use of doing other things, that it's not. Calculation groups can cause headaches if you're not aware of what it can do. It's an amazing feature, and it has a rich feature set outside of just time intelligence. But that being said, if you don't know what you're doing here, or are a little, let's say, more in the beginner stage, you're going to run into a lot of issues very quickly, because it changes the entire model and how entire model works, not just those measures that you choose. So I'm going to pause there, because like I said, this was something I envisioned initially being part of every single semantic model, but that's not the case right now for me.
Yeah, let me, I'm going to give you a little perspective of where I think, for me, where I have found value from calculation groups, right? Calculation groups allow you to add a measure as like a parameter. You can have like specific measure parameters, right? The measure itself becomes injected in other calculations, right? For example, time-based calculations are a good example of this, right? I may have a sum of a column. I may have a min of a column, or a max, or an average of a column. If I'm just doing those, let's call those base measures that are very simple. Then on top of that, I need to take those measures. I need to build a bunch of time-based calculations. So time-based calculations would let you say, I need the last week, the last 7 days, last 14 days. I want a cumulative sum, like all these different numbers, like year-to-date total, month-to-date total, year. There's all these different percentages and calculations. And what you would want is, okay, I'm going to use this sum of something, and I want to just change the time range of when that sum applies. So there's 2 ways to solve that problem. One, you can make a calculate statement, add your sum measure in the calculate statement, and then adjust the filtering, or use the calculate statement to adjust how the range of that time period looks like for that calculation. Fine, totally fine, acceptable. But the challenge becomes, when you look at your model, you now muddy up your model with a whole bunch of extra measures and things. And I've seen models just incredibly bloat. Think of the multiplication here, right? If I've got 3 or 4 base measures, and I have 3 or 4 time-based calculations I want to apply to every one of those measures, well, you just do like, okay, I've got 4 base measures. I've got 4 different time permutations I want. Now it's 4 times 4. Now you've got 16 measures to manage. And so the management of all those measures potentially becomes more cumbersome. It's how do you organize them? Where do you put them in folders? So the report author, yes, it could be easy, but that takes time to build all that. There's a faster way. And that's where I think some of this calculation groups steps in. The other thing that I've seen calculation groups that are used, and it's very specific on a visual, is imagine I want to change the data type within a measure dynamically, or have different formatting for different things inside a measure. Calculation groups are also, I think, really good there to be able to adjust. Okay, I have a text string, I have a number, I have a date time, right? You can change the data type or the formatting of that single measure dynamically. It kind of gives you dynamic measure formatting. That's another use case that I see here as well. So in those are kind of the main pieces here. Now, that's how I understand calculation groups. Let's take this back to now, how does that work in concert with your report building? And I think this is where stuff starts to fall apart a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Calculation groups are amazing. They're super powerful. It does take a little bit of time to like unpack them. And I've learned a lot from Bernat, who does a lot of
in Barcelona.
In Barcelona, he's amazing on these things, and he's written a couple of incredible blogs around calculation groups, how to use them, how to leverage them the best way. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that is incredible. Like, this is so neat stuff. But he studied it. He understands how it works. And so for a average regular introduction report user, right? If you're new to Power BI, calculations or groups are going to feel confusing. You're not going to know what's changing and what's not changing in them. And then integrating them with a visual, it gets to be difficult. On Matrix makes a ton of sense to do it because it just works.
Yeah.
But if you give a calculation group in a semantic model to users, to end users, I think end users get confused. It's weird to understand how to build the measures from a calculation group and use them in a visual, I think.
Well, I think you're selling it a little even short though too, because one, I wish we could have Bernard on to argue, because I don't think it's just a beginner issue. I think that a lot of the features that Power BI has also come out with not have made them mute, so to speak, but it's really made calculation groups more of a enterprise feature to me. Because here's the thing, Mike, for a lot of what you want to do, we have Tyndall to bulk create and add and organize, or I have Tabular Editor. And to do that dynamic switch, I have the field parameters, and I can do those off of measures too, which was a lot of the use cases with calculation groups as well. So I would say majority of the reports, regardless if you're a beginner or you're a heavy developer and you understand calculation groups, there are simplified ways to solve or to have the solution you're looking for that doesn't require calculation groups. And one of them, like the example you brought up at the end, it's not just time intelligence. Well, I may want to have someone, in a sense, choose their own adventure. They, you know what, they're looking at sales, but what if they want to see units and the entire report update to show units over trending?
Dollars or units. This is a good example. Yes.
Right.
Some of sales, some of units. Like that could be totally.
Or, yeah.
Yes.
And but that was previously, you had to have a calculation group to do that. But again, this is a feature I can do.
No, you didn't. You didn't need to have it. It just made your DAX a lot more complicated.
Yeah,
and you had to write more measures.
Like so, do the formatting.
To be clear,
before field parameters, you needed to do formatting was near impossible. We didn't have formatting capabilities. You had to have calculation groups.
Yes, I mean. Yeah. Yes, to some degree, but I also would maybe argue here as well. Like, can't you use like an if statement with multiple format function in it?
And it never worked to do the percentage, and it would be treated as text, not as a number. It would look like a number.
So that I would agree with. Like, you could change the format of it.
It would look like it, but it ain't gonna act like it.
Yeah, it would change it to text, but formatted the way the text wanted to come out as. Yes. Right. So you could. So the reason I'm hesitating there a little bit is you could kind of hack the system by doing like conditional switch statements or some kind of formatting thing. So here's the calculation, and then from there you do a switch statement on top of it. But again, more complicated.
Right.
Got to know how to do this. Got to know how to set it up correctly. Right. So then now you're to the point of like, does all that extra effort add that much value to the report again?
Right. So, and also if I was walking by your computer and I saw that function, I'll go, what are you doing?
Yeah, right.
But so calculation groups came out and allowed us to do that dynamic switch with formatting still treated as a number. But again, we have field parameters now, which is a huge feature that I from a dynamic switch and measures. And if I need to bulk create a time intelligence, I can do that and organize that with Tableau Editor or Tyndall now with the Tyndall script. So the calculation group, I want to give credit where credit's due, because it is a great feature, but more often than not, calculation groups seem to be more headaches than they're worth. Again, there are many use cases, but they are much more in a complicated model, a much more feature rich model where calculation groups are going to make more sense.
Yes.
So I think we're on the same page here too, where like Bernat, and if you look at Bernat's blog, I think it's Espenia BA or EA. I'll try to find it, but the use cases and how he actually showcases it is incredible. But that's probably not what you're trying to do all the time. And the majority of our reporting is not that feature intensive. And I think that's a big difference. I would not recommend to try to fit calculation groups into a solution that does not require it, because you're going to cause more management than it's worth. That being said, I do have reports with calculation groups, and they serve a great purpose in those situations. it's just not a universal thing for me. And I think that there's a big distinction here where Microsoft, I think, has realized this too, Mike, because that's why I think field parameters came out, where they said there's a lot of these more, common cases that we can solve with field parameters and other features that people don't have to create the calculation groups. Now, we'll still have it, but we can circumvent a lot of those simplified cases just creating this new feature in the report itself or in the model. And to me, Mike, that's the direction I've gone for a lot of cases. It's my default in a sense. If I look at my order of operations, I'm looking at, can I do this in field parameters? Can I do this in a macro or a Tyndall script? And then I look at calculation groups as kind of more or less that third option. I don't know. Does that equate or align with your mode of thinking?
I think it does. I think, again, the idea here is there's patterns in what you want to show in the visual. And I guess I would say this. If I'm going to give a pre-built report to users and just say use it, calculation groups, I think makes a lot of sense. Here's a slicer, here's a table. Here's a slicer, here's a visual. Pick the things in the slicer and the visual just works. Like that's the end user experience is beautiful. Like it makes a lot of sense, right? Pick from this drop down what data would you like to see inside this visual or this page or whatever. So I'm picking from a drop down menu units. Great, everything shows as units. I want to see everything as dollars. Great. Here's sales dollars. Here's revenue, right? Those are nice and easy, clean cuts of the data. The end user experience, I think, is brilliant because everything is just switching behind the scenes. If you give a user the semantic model with that calculation group in it and say, build something, I think there's a larger knowledge gap between that user and being able to build an appropriate report or build a report that makes sense. Because there's it's a little bit, I don't know how to describe it. It's more
I
of
know exactly where you're going.
The barrier to entry to get to this thing is a bit higher. There's a bit more effort required to get the design of the solution correct and the report working as you would have expected it to work. So for me, that extra friction there is like, okay, I can use this if I'm the author of it. If we have a centralized BI team that's building reports for users and their user says, wow, I'd really like to be able to switch between this, and this. Great opportunity for calculation groups. But if you tell me I'm a BI specialist and I'm going to build a semantic model for a team member to use, unless I have knowledge that they know how to use calculation groups, I'm probably not going to give them one because it's a little bit more tricky to figure out, okay, because what it does is you basically have you basically make a table in the semantic model that has names in it. Mm-hmm. Those names then do a switching effect on the measure that then switches things out. Yeah, and then so you have to have, and so being able to drag the right data field. So you have like a value measure, and then you have like a column, basically. Right. And those two pieces together combined allow you to select the different measures. So it's like I'm selecting a physical item in the model, like a row and a column, and then that's adjusting what the measure is saying at the time of the measure. So again, conceptually, it makes sense, but you need to be able to think more programmatically around the report and how you build it. So that way, when the user shows up to use it, it makes sense. Does that make sense what I'm describing there?
I love exactly where you're going because I was going to say very similar point. Mike, if you're in an enterprise developer-centric team, calculation groups make a lot of sense and utilize them. But if you're in a managed self-service environment, it's almost a non-starter. It's almost dies there. Because I completely agree with you. I cannot deliver to a managed self-service team, regardless of their skill level calculation group, and expect that to be adopted. That is it's a tough sell because you're right. It's not just
it's a tough
dynamic measure because you're doing calculation items.
I'm not saying you can't teach people to do this because sometimes you make very hard statements around all this stuff. I mean, I get bent out of shape when you start making like I can't and never will. I won't like. It doesn't have to be that hard. Like your statement is so.
I don't mean to be first take on ESPN kind of thing or Stephen A. Smith kind of thing. They will never win the Super Bowl. The
Yankees will never win another World Series,
win another game kind of thing. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not so strong on my language there. I mean, I do think there are consumers or report builders that could understand what calculation groups are doing with some training, right? So
Yeah.
I wouldn't give this to a user and just say build it. I would want to say, look, here's some calculation group stuff. Here's some examples on how to build with this first. I would release that potentially with training that went along with it. So here's my semantic model. Here's measures. Here's the dimensions. Oh, by the way, here's this thing called a calculation group. And let me give you some examples of how you build with it. If I did that, then I think I would feel comfortable handing this off to an end user of the semantic model. But I'm going to get questions about it, and I'm going to have to help support it for a bit until users get comfortable with it. So I don't want to assume, which is kind of what you're doing, is assuming that I just never give it to them. They'll never be able to figure it out. I don't think that's the case.
No.
People are smart. It will get figured out eventually.
Yeah.
What I'm at right now is I wouldn't give it to someone without at least explaining to them how it works.
Oh, of course. Well, you know what assuming does, and I'm not going to say that. You can look that up yourself, kind of thing. But
take care of you and me.
Exactly. But here's the thing: when I say that it'll never happen, it's niche situations. This is not something that's going to be part of the normal process for me. So to me, it's not never, but it's niche. It's unique situations because it's going to very much depend on the skill level of that team, and also me really dedicating time to make sure people understand this. So I'm not going to recommend that for managed self-service. I will say, yeah, there are situations, but that's not going to be part of a universal documentation. Like, hey, anyone can request a calculation group whenever they want. Because Mike, you're making a lot of points here. I feel like in the favor that I'm saying, where there's a lot of training involved. There's a lot of trust on that skill level of who I'm delivering this to in order for them not to mess it up. Because here's the reality of the situation. Calculation groups are a very powerful feature, but it's also very easy to screw up what you're looking at in a report. So I want to be cautious of that.
And I think for me, it's not screw up. It's more of like the results I want to get, I don't understand them, or I didn't know how to put the right columns and measures in the visual so that it works correctly. Right. So it's just a different pattern of like, I'm used to just dragging a field to the visual and it just working. I could drag the field to the measure to the visual, and it may not return any numbers. Or
sounds like screwing up to me.
Or I may put something in there. So the other thing here too, another gotcha here around calculations group is you have to protect it to some degree because the calculation group is. So this is one where Bernat, I did a lot of work around calculation groups, where you build the calculation group, but then it tests certain conditions. If this calculation is exposed in this area, then don't show a value or show a text. Or so there's a lot of other things you could. Again, this is where your head can start hurting when you build semantic models. Is you have to think about, if I'm building a complex measure, what are all the situations in where that measure would be used? And this is where I think SQL BI does a great job of like describing and documenting this as well. If I have a measure that's being filtered a certain way or having a different aggregation a certain way, sometimes measures don't make sense with certain different columns or dimensional information. Or the way the semantic model is built, certain dimensions will not change a value on a measure just because of the way that just the nature of the semantic model. The filtering doesn't apply. What you're doing is different. And that's okay. But then the question would be is what happens when users put different, like you're giving them a semantic model, they could essentially pick any measure, any column, and put it on a visual and get some results. So you want to make sure whatever they're putting on that report page is right.
Yeah. Or
they understand at least the results. So the number of times I've seen people build a measure and get the same value. You see them when you add a filter to the measure, and it filters the same value over and over and over again all the way down the measure. And you're like, wait a minute, I just added this measure and it's the same exact value for every single country. That doesn't make sense. So there's also this little bit of like, can you trust what you have built? Does it make sense? So again, adding the calculations groups, I think just adds another layer of somewhat complexity here. And that's why I would err on the side of, if you are, or if your BI team is building the report and you're not going to let users play with the semantic model, then don't use calculation groups. Now, to be very clear, I have not tested this, but one thing I'm thinking about now as we're talking about this is how do calculation groups work inside Excel, analyze in Excel? How does that fit? I'm guessing they work still.
I have done that. They do work.
Okay. Same kind of pattern though, Tommy? Like, is it the same, complex build pattern you'd have in desktop?
Well, so you made a good point in terms of the analyze in Excel. You may have created your calculation group perfectly and done all the best practices, but if you don't use the right attributes, you will run into that repeating measure and go, well, something's funky here, even though your calculation group is, in a sense, in so many words, correct. And the same applies in Excel too. But Mike, you're bringing up an interesting point about the other feature sets or other settings or situations in a semantic model that's usually calling for a calculation group. And I do want to highlight this too from the mailbag, because odds are if I'm creating a calculation group, I've always had to deal with row level security too, because I don't think I've created a calculation group for like a team of 10 people. That's usually just not the case. This is usually a wide, complex model or very feature set. It's going to have a lot of tentacles in a lot of different places, and row level security is a must. And that's to your point, Mike. I don't know how it's going to behave in certain situations, especially once I release this to the wild. I am not just creating a semantic model to a report. That's not the end of the story here. And a lot of teams also deal with row level security and those limitations. And that requires a ton of testing too. Again, this is very much, I feel like row level security is like manual stick shift. You will feel more empowered if you know what you're doing. Now, if you don't, you're going to screw up your wife's Jeep or that's happened to me kind of thing, or attempt to, or she had a Ford, but it was manual and you're going to look like an idiot on the road, which is very much what I did kind of thing. And to me, that's where I kind of see calculation groups is if you can drive stick, then you can have a great time, but you got to know all the ins and outs of it. And if you are putting out roll-up security, if you're putting out calculation groups and your model has roll-up security, it's on you to test that. And it's a rigorous testing to make sure it works in all the situations, because there are a lot of security issues here too.
Yes. I will agree with the security issues here, but I also want to kind of, go back to Marco Russo's article here. And I think I'm looking at the conclusion, just kind of skimming through the article and just kind of picking out some points here. Marco has got, I think it was Marco who wrote it. Let me just double check here real quick on the article here. This will be in the description. This is Marco Russo and Alberto kind of wrote this one together, apparently. So at the bottom here in the conclusions of the understanding calculation groups, kind of like a 101 of like, here's why you would want to use a calculation group. At the very end, he says, the best practice for using calculation items in DAX is to code them as filters in a calculation statement. So the idea is when you're using calculation groups, think of them as a filter in the calculate statement, right? Year to date, month to date, year to date percentage total, year to date total. Like you're doing like filters on top of a measure. The calculate statement is the measure you're calculating with some sort of filtering applied to it. And then use filters as calculate statements that only evaluate a single measure reference. And then it goes, for more questions, you can go here. So you could add multiple measures. You could do multiple complex things. You could do a lot of stuff within those. Again, that's kind of but for his guidance, best practice is use a single measure. Think of it as I'm building a dynamic calculate statement and I'm adjusting the filter section of the calculate statement, which makes total sense to me. So
I like that point, because a lot of people, or you assume calculation groups are complex, but they are, but you got to keep them simple. And I've run into that problem where I was like, dude, I can do all these things to dynamically do a period over period, 60 days. And once you add multiple measures in there, it does not work the way you expect it to. So when has Marco Russo ever steered us wrong, Mike?
I mean, he does so much thinking on he's way more deep into the topic than I am. So he thinks about these things so much more deeply, and his guidance is like so well thought out. And he spends so much of his time immersing himself in the DAX language. There's no one who can compete with like his knowledge and what his published articles. So highly recommend it. Really good article. There's a number of articles in the description below that'll have that information in there as well. The only other thing I would probably maybe comment here on calculation groups is there was a question around, I think it was row level security. Any considerations there? Any limitations? My understanding is row level security is applied just like everything else. I don't think there's any limitations for a row level security experience. When I read articles from Marco, when things that I've done internally with calculation groups, row level security still is applied just like normal. So I think of row level security as before you see the report, you're applying various filters to dimensional tables, and then that is trickling down all the way to your main fact table for whatever reason, right? So however you build your semantic model, however you've applied row level security, that's just automatically being applied before any of the calculation groups or things run. So I think of it as like if you are doing the performance analyzer on the report page and you hit run and record it and you can see the DAX statement that comes out for that particular visual. This is just like an additional filter condition that happens all the way at the top of the DAX statement. But pre-filters all the data for you, the row level security person, or however you set it up, by region, by person, by email address, whatever. Then that automatically filters everything downstream. Then the calculation group executes and then everything's still applied. So I don't think there's any issue with row level security in calculation groups. It still works the same way. Now, you may have to change slightly how the row level security is implemented because you want to filter different things. Like the one thought I have here might be is, and again, I haven't tried this, but if you have a report and you want to filter the row level, the calculation group table by some security metric, like I don't know why you would do this, but like, Tommy, I'm going to give you a report. You're allowed to see units only, but you're not allowed to see any sales dollars, right? So there's measures in the model that you may not want people to use.
Wouldn't that be a calculation object? That wouldn't be a calculation row level security then. That would be a row level object.
The calculation group, like the grouping itself, actually is a table. It's a table like everything else.
Oh, right. It would be calculation items.
See, right?
But then you're also dealing with object level security too.
Not object. We're talking row level security still. So row level security still applies to that table that's in the calculation group. The calculation group is a table.
Right.
In your calculation group, you have multiple rows. You can apply row level security to that table that would then limit what rows are available to that user to select from the calculation group. Again, it gets wild.
Yeah.
You can't technically select that value from the table, meaning you're applying row level security to the calculation group items, which then changes what calculations you can actually see on the report. Not sure I would apply row level security in that way, but it mechanically, it seems like it would be feasible. You could apply row level security on the calculation grouped items and filter that out by, here's the sales items, here's all the unit items. You could filter it out and say, Tommy, you won't be able to see. You'll filter out all of the selection items for sales, and you could only see units. So that would also work too in row level security. Again, very advanced concept. I would not recommend building something like this. You have to do extensive testing on this to make sure it works as expected. But the calculation group itself, the table that defines the groupings, could be filtered with row level security as well.
No, okay. Well, I'll go back to what you might have been looking up the article. I mentioned what I said on row level security, but Mike, I don't know if you're good on time, but I'm going to kind of go near my closing thought here. And
sure,
I think a big part for me is, again, I'll mention calculation groups are like driving stick shift. If you know what you're doing, you can be much more efficient and have a great time at it. But the situations are not always called for it. My order of operations personally, when I look at it, regardless of the complexity of the model I'm going to create or the situation, what I'm trying to solve, I really look at field parameters as my first option. They are such a great use case and they solve 90% of usually what I'm trying to do. If I do need to bulk create or do a lot of time intelligence, which for calculation groups, time intelligence is the majority of why I use it. It's a great, easy feature to implement that does not require a lot of the complexity we're talking about. You're not going to run into those row level security issues. And again, it's a very simple staple and very common to do. But I usually look at, if I'm not doing a ton, Tyndall or Tabular Editor to bulk create those. And usually my last option is calculation groups is my fail safe. for situations like this. But for me, that's where I lean, Mike. Not saying they are not useful, but they are something that you have to handle with care.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go down this route of calculation groups have their purpose. I think in the time of building things with Power BI, it solved a problem that we had challenges with. It still solves that same kind of problem, but I think to your point, Tommy, we're also expanding what Power BI has been able to do, and there's been other added features that potentially take away some of the luster of calculation groups. And my feeling is it's powerful for creators if you know what you're doing.
Right.
It's difficult to use if you're a consumer. So if you're the consumer side of things, it's a bit more of a struggle and a challenge for you to get through what the calculation things groups can do. On the creator side, it's amazing what you can build. I mean, this is where Bernat has done a lot of these really rich tabular editor experiences. So Bernat, again, a lot of his blogs, if you go look up Bernat's blog, which it's actually down below here, if you go look up his posts and type in calculation group, I mean, he's got probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, he's got 8 or 9, 10. It keeps going. Like he's continually talking. He's got a lot of stuff around calculation groups. So that's really exciting here to see all the features here, but he's doing a lot of really interesting things where, hey, I'm going to create a macro inside Tabular Editor that's going to auto build some stuff for you. Right. So that's kind of where we get a little bit more, I think more usefulness. Cause again, I don't necessarily know there's a pattern. This is going back to like SQL BI. There's a lot of DAX patterns. It's the same thing over and over again. So what Bernat has done is one of his articles is called Industrializing Calculation Groups.
Pretty incredible.
Which you now can select a series of measures and say these measures, these columns, and kind of like just have the script run and it just auto builds what it wants to make sure it all works for you. That's the kind of UI and experience you would have expected kind of from Power BI Desktop. Here's what I want to do. Click these buttons, bing, 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 stuff starts showing up. But this UI in desktop, I mean, for the longest time, we couldn't even build calculation groups in desktop.
Important note, Mike. You're making an important note that we haven't mentioned.
Previously, you would just have to go use only Tabular Editor 2, because that's the free tool. You have to go talk to a semantic model. You have to build the calculation groups there. So for a long time, just building calculation groups were exclusive to only heavy developers. And again, I think the reason why was there's not enough usage. It's confusing. It's complicated. Like the pro users need to use and build these things. So now if I move forward now to where we're at today, we have a very simple UI to help you build a calculation group. And I think that covers a lot of the basic use cases. But with Tyndall now, with the new button for calculation groups that Microsoft is providing, it's easier for you to create those basic calculation groups. Anyways, all this to say is they're powerful, very interesting. I don't use them nearly as much as I used to, 100%. I'm building a lot of models for customers and companies that are trying to consume my models. And I build a lot of models and reports for consumers of those reports. If I know I'm the only one building it, or my team or the BI team is only building these models, then yes, I'll introduce calculation groups because I'm only going to build reports that people will consume. That's it. If I'm going to let people build from the semantic models, I'm very much deprioritizing calculation groups. I'm probably not going to build them into the model. I'd rather have measures, and my experience tells me even if you are doing lots of time-bound calculation changes, users just like grabbing the right measure with the right name for the right time period. Like there's something there around like users just feel comfortable grabbing the right columns. So I think in general, users are going to go down that route anyways. If you're going to build a model, you have to think about your audience, how you're going to consume it.
Yeah. And Mike, I think this is so important too. We are living in an age, and I know those closing thoughts, but it's just such a good point that you said. We're really living in the age where we have to be conscious of the model going to consumers, this managed self-service environment. I mean, that's the world I'm living in too. And not saying the other ones don't exist, but we are more and more to data accessible to everyone, and that includes the semantic model.
Correct. And again, the semantic model is the linchpin. It's the main area where you collect all your data and stuff.
Yeah.
As another final closing thought here as well, Tommy, I'm just kind of poking around this one too. I just had a conversation recently with someone talking about data cataloging. And they were talking about all the different companies and programs that are out there to do like a data catalog. And me personally, I was like, oh man, every time I've had people talk about a data catalog, it just seems to be like overly built, very expensive, quite time consuming to do this. And then I showed someone the One Lake catalog.
Oh, yeah.
While I don't use it as much as I think I should, Microsoft has definitely been improving the One Lake catalog for just exploration and governance. So there's a really rich experience here. Domains is becoming. We talked about this 11 months ago.
Yeah.
11 months ago, I looked this up. 11 months ago, we were talking about domains, and so if we're talking about reports, discoverability, building for an audience, right? Having simple semantic models that you're going to build and consume things from. People can go search for reports. People can go search for semantic models, lake houses, tables, all the different things that are there. And the One Lake catalog provides a whole bunch of additional rich information about what's in these different lake houses. And I really like this, honestly. I think this is super cool. I really like what they're doing here. But again, as we're thinking about calculation groups and how to make things discoverable, the One Lake catalog is continually being more and more of this space for me that, wow, I really like this experience. I don't think I need another third-party tool to build a data catalog anymore. I can start teaching my users to go to the One Lake catalog and start filtering down to the items and domains that they care about. And now they can go self-discover stuff.
I was just having this conversation with a client yesterday, and they were like, "So what do we need to do? We're doing this inventory project." And they're like, "What happens when things change?" I said, "Well, you have metric sets, and we have the data catalog right now, and you have the scanner API right now. So another reason why, if you want to push your data into essential, like something like Power BI or the Microsoft Fabric right now, it makes a ton of sense. The catalog, Mike. I think we need to have another conversation around the catalog. I think that needs to be another thing because I'm pushing people the same."
Yes,
So,
and I think there's this idea of like, how much money do you want to spend on a data catalog?
Yeah.
How much, like, it's expensive to use scanning tools and lineage tools and all these things, but you get all this lineage, you get all this tables and definition columns. So, when you're, again, I keep thinking about this whole concept of like certified data sets, right? Or if we're putting calculation groups in, I'm being very cautious of, do the calculation groups make their way into a certified data set? That way, when I push them back to the One Lake catalog, do those things exist in there? And then having ample names like that, you should have very clear explanations of it, like add descriptions, add why this is here. Hey, this is a value measure that is used with this calculation group. When you use this measure in concert with this column, then you can build these different things. So like you can almost use the descriptions of these measures and elements to really enrich like the usability of the semantic model. And that's what we're going for. We want the semantic model to be easy to understand and consume.
We're no longer in a siloed environment, man. So I love it. I love it.
Anyways, that's super fun. Good stuff there. Really like what's happening. With that, we should probably wrap. So thank you all very much for listening to our ramblings on calculation groups. We don't use them as much more recently. We definitely explored them when they came out originally. And honestly, I don't see a lot of blog posts. I mean, this is a climate of things. This would be interesting, Tommy. There's a lot of internet stuff on the internet, like people blogging and posting about stuff. It'd be interesting to see if we could start collecting all of these blog posts. Again, I would have to think in my mind, if I always think about graphs all the time. If we just captured all the blog posts and searched for keywords, here's a keyword extraction for these blog posts. Let's look at the volume of traffic around calculation groups. When was that really hot? When were people writing a lot of articles around it? I would argue it would come out a lot of the time when Microsoft was introducing these things. And again, back to Marco Russo and team, right? August of 2020. That's when Marco Russo is explaining a lot of these features to people. 2020, we haven't seen a lot of new blog posts around calculation groups. So something here also would be kind of a climate of like what is popular and just seeing what's popular based on blog posts and articles coming out. What keywords are people using and which ones are most popular at this point in time? I would argue in 2020, this was a hot topic, and now we're a much lower volume of calculation group articles. People aren't writing as much about it now. It's not being used as much.
We can use the Data Jam. We have 3,000 articles saved in Data Jam, bookmarks, and we go search through those and actually put that together. That would be interesting.
So it's not called Data Jam, but I'll get it to you correctly. So the website is jam.powerbi.tips.
I like Data Jam actually.
I'm not wrong, Tommy. I like the phrase, but that's not the right website name. So Tommy and I have kind of worked together to build a community-based website around just cool Power BI reports or data pieces that are interesting to us. And so we have Community Jam, which is a jam.powerbi.tips. You can go there. There is a bookmarks page. Tommy and I, whenever we find a bookmark that we find is interesting, an article, something that's neat there, we bookmark them in a tool called Raindrop. And then all of our bookmarks appear. And so we have 9,000 bookmarks across different articles, and we've categorized them by DAX, the service, all these different features here. So you can kind of see what articles are, and it is searchable. You can subscribe to this RSS feed and get the same feed that we're looking at. So we can put all that there. You can see it. You can see visualization articles, service-based articles, really cool stuff as well, to help you kind of find a bunch of really interesting details around podcasts or whatever you want, right? Everything's being subscribed here. You can see all the really interesting details around our collection of Power BI related articles. Anyways, that being said, I'll pause there and say thank you all so much for joining. We appreciate you today. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And share with a friend, since we do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Well, thank you all so much. We appreciate your and all your inputs today. We'll see you next time.